Hey guys, this is Blazin from Lords of Death, and today I'm going to be comparing Crowfall and New World. Crowfall was nice enough to sponsor this video, but that in no way has shaped my opinions on either game. I started playing Crowfall since the very first early access started in 2015. I also played a lot of the what I will call the PvP version of the New World Alpha, which was about October 2018 through summer of 2019. From then, when it shut down and turned into more of the PvP, PvE version of New World, I've played that much more sparingly. So I'm going to dive right into what I think is the biggest difference between the two games, and that is the rule sets. So New World changed from an open world, free-for-all PvP game with full loot and a criminal system into a three-faction game with a PvP toggle that allows you to basically choose when you want to fight or not. One of the things that they say is you can go all the way to endgame now in New World without ever having to PvP. There's very little risk associated with the rewards in a lot of facets of New World. The sieges are now 50 versus 50 instances instead of open world. They require a sign-up, which has been problematic at times when 50 people from one side can only participate, but we've seen in the beta as many as 500 sign up. You essentially have to grind PvP influence quests and or bid gold to be able to do an offensive siege. There's also instance battleground style PvP available. And open world PvP now, if you do find people that are toggled, will grant experience for killing them and sometimes randomly generated loot. Not loot that the player loses for dying, just randomly generated loot that's an addition when killing another player. From what I've seen, the PvP flagging percentage is around 20%, meaning 1 in 5 people roughly are flagged. That's completely anecdotal. That's just my experience, plus asking a bunch of other people that I know that are playing the alpha, and kind of just an average of what I've seen overall. The three-faction rule set really means there's somewhat of a lack of player politics and player agency because the teams are hard-coded. Now, there is a little bit of politics in between, like inter-faction politics, as far as who's going to participate in sieges or kind of filling out your roster of a siege and that sort of thing. But you definitely don't have the player politics and backstabbing and alliances that you would have in a free-for-all PvP game where you're free to choose who you fight with at any given time. So now let's look at Crowfall's rule set. Crowfall actually has a number of different bands. The way they do it is there is a God's Reach world band that is essentially your newbie zone up to about level 25. And then from 25 to 30, they kind of ramp up. So you do have PvP from 25 to 30 in a 50% gold drop zone. And then after that is Sky Point, which is a 100% gold drop zone, but no equipment or inventory items drop at that point. Then moving up after that, you have the Shadows, which is just coming to Crowfall in a subsequent patch. That is a three-faction world. We've had Shadows before in Alpha and Beta, but this is the first time it's going to come to Live soon, and it should be a full inventory loot and gold loot rule set with 3 factions. And then the real meat of the game is the dregs. That is guild versus guild, PvP with full inventory loot and gold loot. There are alliances that guilds can join. Up to 5 guilds can join an alliance. There is lots of politics, lots of player agency, lots of side deals. There are mercenary clans who are hired by the hour to fight for different sides. There's just a lot of strategy, a lot of things going on there. On top of all of that, both the Shadows and the Dregs campaign worlds have a scoring system. Conquest points are what you would imagine. It's, points for holding forts, keeps, outposts, things of that nature. And then there are defined favor, which changes with the seasons. And we'll go into seasons a little bit later. But they are essentially 3 different objectives: 1 glory, 1 wealth, 1 power each season, that change, and you never know what you're going to get until the season comes out. So those give you an extra vector for scoring points. Overall, the rule set of Crowfall is great because it has risk versus reward. You can't just turn off the risk and go into the high level areas and get what you want. You actually have to risk to get the high level rewards. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is character building. So Crowfall has 12 races, 11 classes, and hundreds of different disciplines, each of which either grant active or passive powers. Crowfall has up to 3 different ability bars with 10 to 11 ability slots per bar. The other thing that Crowfall has that is very unique is a vessel system for leveling. So levels 1 to 30, you level like you would in pretty much any game, but at 30, you cannot progress to 31 until you get a vessel made by a necromancer. And those necromancers can actually customize the vessels depending on the attributes or different stats you want. Different body parts like eyes might give you more range or might get you more perception to see invisibility spells. There's a lot of very unique things about the vessel system, with the max level being 35. So a white vessel will get you to 31, green 32, and then all the way up to 35 with a legendary vessel. So looking at New World, New World has just the one human race that you play, and basically a system where the weapon and armor you wear is essentially your class. So weapons have a couple different abilities, and you can equip up to 2 different weapons. And then your armor is kind of more of a situation where, lighter armor, you're going to be faster. Heavier armor, you'll be more survivable, but not as fast. There's a weight system that goes along with it. Each weapon does have a talent tree now, which lets you upgrade some of the abilities. And there is also a gem socketing system on top of that for armor. And then, pretty much everything is driven by attributes from there. So there is some character building in New World. It really still feels more like a survival game, which is kind of what the old alpha felt like. It does really lack RPG character building if you compare it to a game like Crowfall that is so deep in that area. So moving on to combat, Crowfall has action combat. I find the aiming very forgiving. It's a wide hit scan, but is not soft targeting or tab targeting. You do have to aim. It's just forgiving aiming. There's no root motion, so you don't really lose control of your character like some people will say you do in New World. It's maybe a little faster paced than New World. There are very few, if any, iframes in Crowfall. Dodge is used a little bit more for movement than it is dodging abilities because of both the forgiving aiming and the lack of iframe on it. And then there are some active blocking in Crowfall depending on your class and weapon. So looking at New World, New World has what they describe as Dark Souls inspired melee combat with active blocking and dodging of attacks. And then the ranged combat is FPS style ranged combat with headshots. And I would say New World definitely has better overall what I'll call netcode as far as the tightness of the aiming and movement of the characters. New World does use a lot of root motion though, so people that don't like that, it's much more deliberate in the attacks. You'll actually be forced in a direction based on the attack to where you might feel like you lose control of your character, whereas Crowfall uses split body animations for the most part, which means the bottom half of your character can move with WASD while the top half of your character attacks, whether you're doing left click attacks or if you're using abilities or anything like that. So the next thing we're going to look at is the worlds in both games. So New World has a handcrafted environment. It is seamless with basically no zoning. The map is not small at all. I wouldn't call it gigantic for an MMO, but it's fairly large. It's a static map, so it doesn't change like Crowfall does. I would say it is maybe the single most immersive MMO world I've ever played in. I really love the different biomes, and especially loved hiding in tall grass, proning in tall grass or bushes, and just popping out and killing somebody. That was one of my favorite things to do in New World. So looking at Crowfall's world, it is a procedurally generated environment. Maps are never exactly the same. There are zones connected to each other by rune gates. It uses handcrafted land parcels, which fit together like Tetris pieces to craft each zone procedurally. So if you imagine the different land parcels like cards in a deck, the procedural generator essentially has some rules built in that they're able to do, but it basically shuffles the deck and gives you zones. The biomes are still somewhat limited though, so they definitely need what I would call more cards in the deck to give the world a more varied feel. The season system in Crowfall is very unique though. Worlds do progress from spring all the way to winter, and the aesthetic changes as the seasons do. Worlds actually die at the end of winter, which means the server shuts down and a new world begins. It's an extremely unique system and design with a lot of room for growth. They really just need to keep building more and more land parcels and new biomes to mix into the deck. Next, let's look at the harvesting and crafting in each game. Crowfall has an extremely deep harvesting and crafting system. So the harvesting is based on disciplines. You basically can equip your standard disciplines, whether it's skinning, logging, quarrying, mining, things like that. But there is a grave digging profession as well that goes along with necromancy. And then there are specialty disciplines on top of those that will boost your abilities in that given area, whether it's like survivalist for logging or something like villain or connoisseur for some of the other professions. The crafting is also incredibly deep, where you can actually choose the stats you want on items by making different combinations of either metal bars or leather or wood planks. And then you experiment on the items so that you can actually choose what stats you're going to boost on the items, and based on your crafting skills you end up with better rolls or worse rolls. On top of that, once you make an item, you can actually factory copy it to make an exact copy of that item using similar materials. So you can actually get a very good roll on an item and save it as a template, and then make factory copies of it for everybody in your guild. There's a lot of interdependency in Crowfall's crafting. Really no profession can stand on its own. If you're making a weapon, blacksmith weapon, a lot of times you're going to need a leather worker or a woodworker for some of the components. The same thing with making leather armor. You're going to need some metal items from a blacksmith, and so on and so forth. There's a very deep crafting and harvesting system there that really requires players to work together. Moving on to New World, I would say New World has a somewhat similar harvesting and crafting system as Crowfall. It just doesn't have nearly the depth. It's much more streamlined. Harvesting is more of an on-use system, meaning that as you hit nodes, you gain skill. There's a few tiers of materials in New World, but not nearly the variety or allows nearly the amount of combinations that Crowfall has. The crafting system is, again, just more streamlined, but not quite as in-depth. It has a sort of RNG system that determines item quality, similar to the experimenting in Crowfall, but New World really kind of does a lot more of it for you. You don't really have as much agency in the decisions that you're making. It's just it's a much more streamlined system, but doesn't have nearly the depth or the control of the system that Crowfall has. Moving on to player housing. Crowfall gives each player their own Eternal Kingdom server that allows you to place land pieces like Tetris, land parcels like Tetris pieces, and then you can place houses or all the way up to castles on the land. You can set up your own vendors in the houses. You can set up chests. There's a very deep system of permissions to where you can grant other players the ability to place land, grant other players on the land the ability to place vendors or houses or chests. It's a very deep system, and each player's Eternal Kingdom is a separate server that actually boots up, which you can also grant permission to other players to be able to boot it up. We've set up arenas for dueling. We've seen marketplaces or crafting and logistics centers for guilds. There's a lot of use for Eternal Kingdoms and housing in Crowfall beyond just being a pretty aesthetic area. New World housing is actually instanced off of the main world, meaning, you see whoever has the biggest house in the game world, but beyond that, the interior is instanced. It allows players to have another buying location and some cosmetic options. Again, it doesn't have near the depth that Crowfall has. In this last section, I'm really going to go over the things I like about each game, dislike about each game, and I have some advice for both of the development teams moving forward. So New World has great combat, a great world environment, it is an extremely polished game. Otherwise, I think it's very shallow and lacking in depth. It needs deeper RPG-inspired character building. It needs alternate server rule sets. That's the biggest thing that I think it's missing is why not do a PvP server where the PvP flag is forced to on, or let us have guild versus guild servers instead of just factions. Basically, New World has very polished game features, but it lacks creativity or good design in many areas. They're basically just copying what has already been done. New World needs to take some risks, offer alternative ways to play the game, especially a guild versus guild forced flag PvP rule set. Crowfall, on the other hand, I think is about the exact opposite. Extremely great, innovative game design. What Crowfall is lacking is polish, and they need to deliver on some key missing features like handshake sieges, alliance scoring, and a zone cap solution. Overall, Crowfall just needs to stay the course design-wise and continue working on delivering polished features in a timely manner. Well, thanks for making it to the end of this video, guys. I appreciate it, and whether you're going to play New World or Crowfall, I sincerely hope you have fun. I sincerely hope both games are successful, and thanks for watching. See you next time.